"Please take them off," he gasped, thrusting the burlap sack toward her before collapsing onto the rough wooden floor. Thunder rolled across the Arizona territory like distant cannon fire. Cordelia Washington sat motionless in her cabin chair, rifle balanced across her knees. The black wool of her dress had faded to charcoal over 3 years of wearing, but she kept it pressed and clean. A widow's uniform in a land that made widows daily. The door had burst open without ceremony. Jeremiah Kilpatrick stumbled through like a man fleeing ghosts. Blood caked his shirt collar. His iron jaw caught the firelight, that crude replacement gleaming where his real one had been blown away in some long-ago mining accident. Everyone called him Iron Jaw. Everyone kept their distance. Rain drummed the cabin roof. Cord studied the unconscious man sprawled before her hearth. 6 months he'd been missing from Copper Ridge. The sheriff had stopped looking after the first week. Men disappeared in the territory. Sometimes they came back. Usually they didn't. The sack lay where it had fallen from Iron Jaw's grip. Rough hemp, stained dark with something that might have been blood, might have been rust. Cord had learned not to make assumptions about stains. She rose from her chair. Her boots made no sound on the floorboards. 3 years of hunting men had taught her to move like smoke. The territory's first colored bounty hunter, they called her. The Black Widow, they whispered when they thought she couldn't hear. Iron Jaw's breathing came shallow and fast. Fever painted his cheeks. His lips moved without sound, forming words meant for some other conversation, some other time. Cord knelt beside the sack. The hemp was coarse under her fingers, heavy with more than its contents should warrant. She worked the drawstring loose. Her breath stopped. Mining badges glinted in the firelight. Brass and tin, dulled by underground air and years of wear. She recognized them. Every miner in the territory carried one. Company property, they said, returned upon death to the families, buried with the men who earned them. Personal effects filled the spaces between badges. A carved bone comb, a leather prayer book, a photograph of a woman and child, edges worn soft by countless viewings. Items that should rest in coffins 6 feet down. Her hand found the silver pocket watch at the bottom. The world tilted. Tobias had carried this watch every day since their father died, wounded each morning before heading into the Silverton mine. The inscription on the back read, "To my son, may time always bring you home." Their mother had saved for 2 years to afford it. Cord had placed this watch in Tobias's hands before they closed his coffin, folded his fingers around it herself, watched the undertaker seal the pine box that held her brother's broken body. The watch face gleamed, recently polished, recently wound. The hands showed the correct time. Iron Jaw stirred on the floor, his eyes opened, unfocused and wild. "They ain't dead," he whispered. "God forgive me, they ain't dead." Cord's finger traced the watch's smooth surface. Tobias had been 26 when the mine took him. Strong hands, quick smile, always humming some tune their mother taught him. The cave-in had claimed 8 men that day. 8 funerals. 8 families left to scrape by. "Where did you get this?" Her voice came steady despite the earthquake in her chest. Iron Jaw tried to sit up, failed. "Deep mines, Devil's Canyon, they're working them still." The words made no sense. Dead men didn't work. Dead men didn't wind their watches. Who's working? The ones that died, except they didn't die. Iron Jaw's fever-bright eyes fixed on hers. They just disappeared. Thunder crashed overhead. Rain found the gaps in the cabin roof, dripping steady rhythms onto the floor. Cord had built this place herself after the mine took everything. 4 walls and a roof. Enough space for one woman and her ghosts. She'd chosen isolation, chosen the black dress, chosen to hunt dangerous men rather than trust any man again. The territory was full of predators. She'd learned to be a bigger predator. But this watch changed everything. Iron Jaw's hand closed around her wrist. His grip burned with fever. "Don't trust Morse. Don't trust nobody with a badge." Sheriff Clayton Morse had handled the mine investigation, ruled it accidental, structural failure, he'd said, act of God. No one to blame, no one to prosecute. The families got sympathy and empty coffins. Sleep now. Cord pulled a blanket over Iron Jaw. His breathing evened as unconsciousness took him. She returned to her chair. The watch ticked in her palm, counting seconds that led somewhere impossible. If Tobias lived, why hadn't he come home? If he lived, where had he been for 3 years? If he lived, why had she buried an empty box? The fire settled in the hearth. Outside, the storm moved across the desert, taking its thunder toward the distant mountains. Cord sat in the growing quiet, holding her brother's watch, feeling the steady pulse of its mechanism against her skin. Dead men didn't polish their timepieces. Dead men didn't appear in fever dreams. Dead men didn't wind watches that kept perfect time. But living men sometimes had reasons to disappear. Living men sometimes made choices that required them to die on paper while breathing in secret. Living men sometimes broke their sisters' hearts to save their sisters' lives. The watch ticked on, each second a question, each question a doorway to answers she wasn't sure she wanted. Cord closed her eyes and let the sound fill the silence. Tomorrow, she would need to decide what kind of woman she was going to be. The kind who accepted the comfortable grief she'd learned to carry, or the kind who would risk everything on the impossible hope that death could be undone. The kind who stayed safe in her cabin, or the kind who followed mysterious strangers into Devil's Country to find out what happened to dead men who still kept time. Dawn came pale and reluctant across the desert. Cord spread the sack's contents across her kitchen table, each item a question mark carved in brass and leather. 7 mining badges from 7 different men. Men she'd known. Men whose funerals she'd attended. Samuel Creek, who taught her to track rabbits when she was 10. Marcus Hendley, whose wife still swept her porch every morning, waiting for him to come home. Old Pete Morrison, who'd hummed hymns while he worked. All dead, all buried, all represented here by the badges that should have stayed in the ground with them. Cord picked up Marcus's badge. The brass was dull but clean, too clean for something pulled from a grave. The leather cord still held the smell of sweat and mine dust. Recent sweat, recent dust. Iron Jaw slept fitfully by the fire. His fever had broken sometime before sunrise, but his dreams were loud with names and apologies. He called out to men she recognized, men from the badges. She found a newspaper clipping folded beneath Pete Morrison's prayer book. Last week's edition of the Territorial Herald. Another mine accident. Another group of colored miners claimed by unstable ground. Another investigation that would find no fault, no blame, no justice. The pattern was there, had always been there. She'd been too deep in her own grief to see it. Cord holstered her Colt and stepped outside. The morning air tasted of rain-settled dust and sage. Her horse, a sturdy mare named Ruth, lifted her head from grazing. They'd ridden together for 3 years, hunting men across the territory. Ruth knew the weight of silence. The ride to the cemetery took an hour. Cord had buried her family on a hill overlooking Copper Ridge, where the wind could carry her words to them when grief made her need to speak aloud. 3 headstones in a neat row. Her husband James, her son David, her brother Tobias. The graves were tended. Someone had been here. Fresh wildflowers lay across Tobias's headstone. Desert lupin and Indian paintbrush, bound with grass stems. The flowers were no more than 2 days old. Cord had visited last Sunday. These flowers hadn't been here then. She knelt beside the stone. The earth was undisturbed, but the flowers spoke louder than any disturbance could. Someone who knew Tobias was still alive. Someone who cared enough to mark his supposed resting place. You didn't leave these. The voice came from behind her. Cord turned. Maria Songbird approached on foot, her Apache grandmother's teaching evident in how she moved through the desert without disturbing a single stone. Half Apache, half Mexican, Maria traded goods between the reservation and the town. She spoke 5 languages and trusted none of the men who spoke them. You know who did? Maria stopped beside David's grave. She'd brought blankets when the fever took him, sat with Cord through the worst night of her life. Some bonds were forged in helplessness. I did. The words hit harder than any bullet. Cord's hand found the butt of her Colt without conscious thought. Maria saw the movement but didn't step back. Why? Because I saw him, working in chains at Devil's Canyon. Your brother lives. The world shifted. The headstone, the flowers, the distant town, all of it suddenly unreal. Cord had built 3 years around this grave. 3 years of mourning, of careful grief, of learning to carry the weight of loss without letting it crush her. That's not possible. Possible and true are different things. Maria's dark eyes held no deception. She'd never lied to Cord, never offered false hope or empty comfort. Cord stood. Her legs felt uncertain, as if the ground itself had become unreliable. When? 2 weeks ago. I was trading horses with the Apache near the canyon. Saw men working a mine that ain't supposed to exist. Recognized him by the scar on his neck. Tobias had carried that scar since childhood. A broken bottle in a saloon fight when he was 15. Curved white line that ran from his ear to his collarbone. Distinctive as a brand. If he's alive, why hasn't he come home? Maria touched the flowers on the headstone. Man in chains can't choose his own path. The words settled into Cord's chest like stones. Tobias enslaved. Working in darkness while she mourned his death, while she learned to live without him. Who's holding him? Same people who held the others, same people who staged the accidents. Maria's voice carried the weight of dangerous knowledge. Your friend in the cabin, he knows more than I do. Iron Jaw. The fever dreams made sense now. Names of dead men who weren't dead. Guilt over secrets he'd carried too long. Cord remounted Ruth. The flowers lay bright against the weathered stone, marking a grave that held no body, mourning a death that never happened. 3 years of grief built on a lie. The ride back to the cabin stretched long and bitter. Ruth sensed her rider's mood and moved with careful steps, as if sudden movement might shatter something fragile. The desert stretched away on all sides, vast and indifferent to human pain. Iron Jaw was awake when she entered, sitting up drinking water from her tin cup. His eyes tracked her movements as she hung her gun belt on its peg. You went to see the graves. Someone's been leaving flowers. Maria Songbird. She's been watching the canyon for months, waiting for the right time to tell you. Cord sat across from him. The kitchen table still held its evidence of impossible truths. Tell me about Devil's Canyon. Iron Jaw set down the cup. His hands shook slightly, whether from fever or fear she couldn't tell. There's things worse than death in this territory. Your brother found that out. Start talking. The mine accidents ain't accidents. They're harvests. His voice came steady now, as if speaking the truth gave him strength. They take the men who strike good claims. Men nobody will miss too much. Colored men. The pattern crystallized. Isolated workers. Claims that reverted to the company after their deaths. Families too poor, too frightened to ask hard questions. Where are they being held? Underground. Miles of tunnels in Devil's Canyon. They're working claims that would make a man rich if he lived to spend the gold. Cord's fingers found Tobias's watch in her pocket, still ticking, still keeping time for a man who should have died 3 years ago. Why fake the deaths? Dead men don't have legal claims. Dead men's families don't ask questions. Dead men don't try to escape. But living men did. Living men wound their watches and waited for rescue. Living men trusted their sisters to find them. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying dust and the promise of another storm. Cord thought of Tobias in darkness, counting days by the rhythm of pickaxes and the rattle of chains, wondering if anyone would come, wondering if anyone even knew he was alive. She thought of the fresh flowers on his grave, Maria's quiet vigil, the evidence spread across her table, all of it pointing toward a truth she'd been too buried in grief to see. Her brother was alive. Her mourning had been wasted on an empty grave. Her careful acceptance of loss had been built on other men's lies. The wind rattled the cabin windows. Inside, silence stretched between them while Iron Jaw waited for her decision. Outside, Ruth nickered softly, sensing the approach of weather. Time to choose. Safety or truth. Grief or hope. The woman she'd learned to be, or the sister she'd always been. Iron Jaw reached inside his shirt and withdrew a leather portfolio. The kind federal marshals carried. The kind that held official papers and government seals. I ain't just a prospector, Cord. Haven't been for 8 months. She studied his face. The fever had burned away pretense, leaving only exhausted truth. What are you? Deputy U.S. Marshal. Working undercover for the Territorial Investigation Unit. He opened the portfolio with careful hands. Official documents, federal authorization, a badge that gleamed silver in the morning light. The pieces shifted in Cord's mind. Iron Jaw's long absence, his knowledge of the illegal operation, the evidence he'd risked his life to steal. Washington's been getting reports about missing minors, patterns that don't make sense unless someone's working very hard to make them disappear. He coughed, still weak from fever. They sent me to find proof. Cord poured coffee from the pot she kept warm on the stove. Strong and bitter, the way grief had taught her to take most things. You found it. More than I bargained for. The Silverton Mining Consortium isn't just stealing claims. They're running a slave operation bigger than anything since the war. The coffee burned her throat. She welcomed the discomfort. Physical pain was simpler than the weight of what Iron Jaw was telling her. How many men? 43 that I counted, maybe more in the deeper tunnels. His voice carried the exhaustion of a man who'd seen too much. They've been at this for years, taking men from accidents they staged themselves. Cord walked to the window. The desert stretched away toward the mountains, vast and empty. Somewhere in that emptiness, her brother worked in chains while she'd spent 3 years learning to live without him. The blood on your clothes. My own. Had to fight my way out when they discovered I was asking too many questions. Iron Jaw touched his side where his shirt was torn. Barely made it to your cabin. A horse approached outside. Single rider coming fast. Cord recognized the mount before she saw the man. Sheriff Clayton Morse's bay gelding, distinctive for the white blaze on its face. We have company. Iron Jaw was on his feet instantly, federal training overriding his injuries. He gathered the evidence from the table with quick, efficient movements. The badges disappeared into his coat pockets. The documents vanished into hidden compartments in his portfolio. Cord checked her Colt. Full cylinder. Extra cartridges on her gun belt. 3 years of bounty hunting had taught her to stay ready for trouble. Morse knocked on the door. 3 measured raps, the way lawmen announced themselves when they wanted to seem official. Cord had heard that knock before, usually when the sheriff needed her to track someone dangerous. She opened the door. Morse stood on her porch, hat in hand, projecting the careful courtesy he used with women, especially women who carried guns and knew how to use them. Morning, Cord. Heard you might have had a visitor last night. Lot of visitors pass through. Desert's hard on travelers. Morse's eyes moved past her, taking in the cabin's interior, looking for signs of Iron Jaw's presence. The sheriff was thorough when it mattered to him. This particular visitor's been missing for months. Jeremiah Kilpatrick. Some folks in town saw a man matching his description heading this way yesterday. Some folks in town see lots of things. Desert makes people imagine. The sheriff stepped closer, close enough that she could smell the tobacco on his breath and see the calculation in his eyes. Morse had always been careful around her, respectful. Now something had changed. Mind if I look around, just to set folks' minds at ease? It wasn't really a question. Morse's hand rested on his gun butt, casual but ready. Behind him, dust clouds marked the approach of more riders. He hadn't come alone. Got a warrant. Don't need one for a wellness check. Man's been missing, could be hurt. Iron Jaw appeared in the kitchen doorway. He'd hidden the evidence, but there was no hiding himself. Morse's eyes went sharp when he saw the federal badge pinned to Iron Jaw's shirt. Marshal Kilpatrick, been wondering where you got to. The words hit Cord harder than any physical blow. Morse knew, had known all along. The careful courtesy, the respectful distance, all of it had been performance while he waited for the right moment to act. Sheriff. Iron Jaw's voice carried federal authority now. I'll need you to come with me. Got some questions about mining accidents in your jurisdiction. Morse smiled. The expression held no warmth. "I bet you do. Unfortunately, there's been a development. Federal marshals don't have jurisdiction here anymore." He produced a document from his coat, official paper with territorial seals. Cord couldn't read the details from where she stood, but she could read Iron Jaw's face as he scanned it. Emergency Territorial Authority supersedes federal oversight in matters of local security. Morse tucked the paper away. "As of yesterday, I have full discretion to handle threats to territorial stability." The riders outside had stopped. Cord counted 4 horses through the window, armed men by the way they sat their saddles. This had been planned. "Convenient timing," Iron Jaw said. "Ain't it just?" Morse drew his gun. Not fast, not aggressive, just steady and sure. "I'm placing you under arrest for interfering with territorial business. Cord, you'll want to step aside." She didn't move. Couldn't move. 3 years of careful distance from the law, 3 years of working within a system she didn't trust, had led to this moment. The system protecting its own interests while good men disappeared into darkness. On what charges? Trespassing on private property, theft of mining company assets, inciting unrest among the local population. Morse's gun stayed level. Federal badge don't mean much when the territory revokes your authority. Iron Jaw raised his hand slowly. His eyes found Cord's. In them she saw apology and determination in equal measure. He'd known this might happen. Had come to her anyway. "The evidence I gathered is already on its way to Washington. You're too late to stop that." "Maybe, but I can stop you from gathering any more." The wind outside picked up, rattling the cabin windows and stirring dust devils in the yard. Cord felt the weight of decision settling on her shoulders. She could step aside. Let Morse take Iron Jaw. Return to her careful isolation and 3-year-old grief. Or she could choose the harder path. The one that led toward answers and justice, and the impossible hope that dead brothers might still draw breath. Morse's men were dismounting outside. Their boots crunched on the gravel as they approached the cabin. Time was running out for choices. "Step aside, Cord, this don't concern you." But it did concern her, had always concerned her. Every staged accident, every stolen claim, every family left to grieve empty graves. The pattern had been there, waiting for someone brave enough or desperate enough to see it. Someone who'd already lost everything and had nothing left to lose. Someone who carried her brother's watch and heard it ticking away the minutes of his captivity. The wind gusted harder, shaking the cabin walls. Outside, the approaching storm darkened the sky. Inside, silence stretched between the 3 of them while the weight of truth settled into the spaces between words. Time to choose. Safety or justice. Isolation or alliance. The woman who'd learned to live with loss or the sister who'd never stopped hoping for impossible things. Cord drew her Colt in one fluid motion. The barrel found Sheriff Morse's chest before his next breath. "I said step aside." Morse's eyes went wide. He'd miscalculated. Thought 3 years of working within his system had made her soft, made her compliant. "You're making a mistake, Cord." "Already made it. 3 years ago when I trusted you to investigate my family's death." Iron Jaw moved toward the back door while Morse's attention stayed fixed on the gun pointed at his heart. Outside, boots scraped on wood. The other men were surrounding the cabin. "There's 4 of them out there. You can't fight them all." "Won't have to." Cord backed toward the kitchen. "Iron Jaw, back door's clear for now." Morse raised his voice. "Johnson, Peters, get around back." Too late. Iron Jaw had already slipped through the rear exit. Cord heard Ruth's hooves as he led the mare away from the cabin. Smart man. Getting the horse clear before the shooting started. "He won't get far," Morse said. "Far enough." The front door exploded inward. 3 men in dusty coats, guns drawn. Cord recognized them. Company men from the mining consortium, not deputies, not lawmen. Just hired guns with badges that meant nothing. She dove behind the kitchen table as gunfire erupted. Wood splinters filled the air where she'd been standing. The coffee pot shattered, sending hot liquid across the floor. The cabin had been her sanctuary. 4 walls that held 3 years of careful solitude. Now it was just cover in a gunfight she should have seen coming. Morse shouted orders to his men, professional, organized. They'd done this before. Cord crawled toward the window that faced Devil's Canyon. The glass was already cracked from the gunshots. She put her elbow through it and rolled outside into the dust. More gunfire. The men were shooting at shadows now, filling her home with lead and fury. She stayed low, using the cabin's bulk to shield her approach to the small barn where she kept supplies. Iron Jaw waited inside the barn. Blood seeped through his shirt where his wound had reopened. Ruth stood saddled and ready beside him. "They'll burn the cabin," he said. "Let them. Nothing in there I can't replace." Except there was. Letters from her mother, photographs of her son, the quilt her grandmother had sewn. 3 years of building a life from the ruins of the old one, and now it would burn because she'd chosen truth over safety. The gunfire stopped. Morse's voice carried across the desert air. "Cord, come out and we'll talk. No need for anyone else to get hurt." She checked her ammunition. 4 shots left in the cylinder, extra cartridges on her gun belt. Not enough for a sustained fight against 4 armed men. "There's another way," Iron Jaw said. "Maria Songbird told you they're moving the prisoners soon, today if my information's right. So we beat them to Devil's Canyon. Document what's there before they can relocate the evidence." His eyes held fever-bright determination. "Your brother included." The plan was desperate, probably fatal. Riding into a stronghold held by the same men who were trying to kill them. But staying here meant capture or death, and Tobias would disappear forever into whatever hole they'd prepared for him. "How many guards at the canyon?" 6, maybe 8. Most of their men are here." Smoke began rising from the cabin's windows. They'd decided burning was easier than fighting. Cord watched 3 years of her life turn to ash and felt something hard settle in her chest. Not anger, something colder, more permanent. "Mount up." They rode out through the barn's rear door while the cabin burned behind them. Ruth carried both riders without complaint, her steady gait eating up the miles toward Devil's Canyon. The desert stretched ahead, broken and hostile. Iron Jaw clung to her waist as fever and blood loss took their toll. His breathing came shallow against her shoulder. The man was dying by degrees, but still determined to see his mission through. "Why'd you become a marshal?" she asked. "Lost my family to claim jumpers in Colorado. Law wouldn't help because they were the law." His voice was barely audible over the wind. Federal badge was the only way to fight back. They understood each other. 2 people who'd learned that justice was something you took, not something you received. 2 people who'd lost everything and found purpose in the losing. The sun climbed toward its peak. No shade in this part of the desert, just rock and sage and the promise of water somewhere ahead. Ruth's breathing grew labored, but she kept moving. Devil's Canyon opened before them at midday. A slash in the earth, red rock walls descending into shadow. Mining equipment scattered along the rim. Wooden structures that shouldn't exist according to any territorial survey. They dismounted a mile away. Ruth needed rest and water. Iron Jaw needed rest and medical attention he wasn't going to get. Cord needed her brother back from whatever hell these men had created. "Guard stations there and there," Iron Jaw pointed with a shaking hand. "Main entrance is that wooden structure. Prisoners are held in the deep tunnels." "How deep?" "Half a mile down, maybe more." Cord studied the canyon through her field glasses. 2 guards visible at the main entrance. 1 walking patrol along the rim. Signs of more men deeper in the operation. "They'll recognize you." "Not looking the way I do now. Fever's changed my face. Blood's changed my clothes." Iron Jaw tried to stand and swayed. "Besides, I ain't planning to walk in the front door." "What are you planning?" "Distraction. Draw them away from the entrance while you get inside." He checked his revolver with hands that shook from weakness. "Find your brother. Document what you see. Get out." It was a desperate plan, the kind that got good people killed and bad people promoted, but it was the only plan they had. The sun beat down on red rock and human ambition. Somewhere in the tunnels below, men worked in darkness while their families mourned empty graves. Somewhere in that darkness, Tobias kept time with a watch that proved the dead could still draw breath. Cord reloaded her Colt. 6 shots. 6 chances to find truth in a place built on lies. "Give me an hour," Iron Jaw said. "Then make your move." She watched him walk away toward the canyon's eastern approach. A sick man with a federal badge and enough stubborn courage to face impossible odds. The kind of man the territory needed more of and killed too quickly. Ruth nuzzled her shoulder. The mare sensed violence coming the way animals always did. Horses were honest about fear. People pretended they weren't afraid until the moment came to prove it. Cord settled into position, overlooking the canyon entrance. The wooden structure looked innocent enough from a distance. Just another mining operation in a territory full of them. But she knew what lay beneath, had seen the evidence, carried her brother's watch as proof that some graves held nothing but lies. The wind picked up, carrying dust and the distant sound of men shouting orders in the canyon below. Time stretched thin and taut, each minute bringing her closer to answers she'd spent 3 years trying not to need. Somewhere in the tunnels, Tobias was waiting. Somewhere in her chest, hope was growing teeth. Gunshots echoed from the canyon's eastern rim. Iron Jaw had begun his distraction. Cord watched 3 guards run toward the sound, leaving the main entrance with only 1 man posted. She moved down the rocky slope on silent feet. 3 years of tracking dangerous men had taught her to become shadow when shadow was needed. The remaining guard stood with his back to her approach, rifle held loose in his hands. The blow to his head dropped him without a sound. Cord caught his rifle before it clattered on stone. She dragged him behind a stack of mining equipment and took his keys. The wooden structure housed an elevator platform, crude but functional. Ropes and pulleys designed to move men and ore between the surface and the depths. A sign nailed to the support beam read, "Authorized personnel only." She worked the manual crank. The platform descended into darkness, carrying her away from sunlight and toward 3 years of buried questions. The canyon walls closed around her, red rock giving way to gray stone, then to darkness that swallowed everything. Oil lamps marked the tunnel entrance at the bottom. Their light revealed wooden support beams and rail tracks disappearing into the mountain's heart. The air tasted of dust and fear and human sweat. Voices echoed from deeper in the tunnel system, men calling to each other in the language of forced labor, pick strikes against stone. The rattle of chains. Cord followed the sound. Her boots made no noise on the wooden crossties that supported the narrow-gauge rails. Cart tracks in the dust showed recent use. This operation moved significant amounts of ore. The tunnel branched. She chose the path where voices were loudest, where the sound of chains was clearest. The oil lamps grew more frequent, illuminating a horror she'd imagined but never seen. Men worked in ankle shackles, their dark skin gray with rock dust. Some she recognized from the mining badges Iron Jaw had carried. Samuel Creek, thinner than she remembered but unmistakably alive. Marcus Hendley, swinging a pick with mechanical precision. Old Pete Morrison sat against the tunnel wall, too exhausted or too sick to work. His eyes found hers in the lamplight. Recognition flickered, then caution. "Cord," his whisper carried disbelief. She pressed a finger to her lips and moved closer. The chains around his ankles were solid iron, secured with locks that would require keys she didn't have. "Where's Tobias?" Pete's eyes went dark. "Deeper tunnels. With the supervisors." The word carried weight beyond its letters. Supervisors weren't guards. They were prisoners who'd been given authority over other prisoners. Men who'd chosen collaboration over continued suffering. "How long have you been here?" 3 years. Since the cave-in that wasn't no cave-in. Pete's voice held the exhaustion of a man who'd stopped counting days. "They told us our families thought we were dead. Said nobody was coming. But somebody had come. Too late for some things, maybe not too late for others." Cord moved deeper into the tunnel system. The voices grew louder. The sound of picks against stone echoed from multiple chambers. This operation was larger than Iron Jaw had estimated. Dozens of men. Years of planning. She found the supervisor's station in a natural chamber lit by hanging oil lamps, wooden desks, record books, a chair where someone sat to count hours and measure human misery in ounces of gold. The man sitting in that chair turned when her shadow fell across the threshold. Tobias, 3 years older, thinner, wearing clean clothes while the other men wore rags. A brass key ring hung from his belt, the keys to every lock in this place. "Hello, sister." His voice carried no surprise. He'd been expecting her. Had probably been expecting her since Iron Jaw's escape brought federal attention to the canyon. "Pete said you were dead." "Pete says lots of things. Most of them ain't true anymore." Tobias stood slowly, his hand resting near the gun at his hip. "Not threatening, not yet. You shouldn't have come here." "Where else should I come? You're my brother." "Was your brother? That man died in a cave-in 3 years ago." Tobias moved around the desk, putting distance between them. "Man you're looking at made different choices." The explanation came in pieces. The staged cave-in, the offer from the mining consortium, work for them or watch his sister die in another convenient accident. They'd shown him proof of what happened to family members who asked too many questions. "They said they'd kill you if I didn't cooperate. Said they'd make it look like an accident, same as they'd done with the others." Cord felt the watch ticking in her pocket, time moving forward while everything else moved backward. "So you let me think you were dead. Better than letting you be dead for real." The logic was sound. Terrible, but sound. The consortium had leverage over men with families. Men with something to lose. They used that leverage to build their operation. How many others made the same choice? Enough. Tobias's eyes held shame and defiance in equal measure. "Enough to keep this place running while you learn to live without us." Footsteps echoed in the tunnel outside. Multiple men moving fast. The distraction Iron Jaw had provided was ending. Guards were returning to their posts. "They know you're here," Tobias said. "Been tracking you since you entered the tunnels." A man appeared in the chamber entrance, well-dressed, clean-shaven. The kind of man who gave orders from a distance and kept his hands soft. Marcus Thornfield, according to the name plate on his coat, guard captain. "Miss Washington, we've been expecting you." More men crowded into the chamber, armed guards with the look of professionals. Men who knew how to handle troublesome visitors. "Your friend Marshal Kilpatrick provided quite a distraction. Unfortunately, distractions end." Thornfield smiled without warmth. "As do federal investigations that rely on evidence that can disappear." He gestured to the guards. "Prepare the charges. Time to close this operation and open a new one elsewhere." The words hit Cord harder than physical blows. They were going to collapse the tunnels, bury the evidence along with everyone who'd seen it, make it look like another mining accident while they relocated their operation to some other canyon. What about the men? What about them? Dead men don't testify in federal court. Tobias stepped forward. "That wasn't the agreement. You said if I cooperated, if I helped run this place, you'd keep the men alive." "Plans change. Your sister's investigation has made this location unsuitable." Thornfield checked his pocket watch. "You have 30 minutes to say goodbye." The guards filed out, leaving Cord and Tobias alone in the lamplight. Brother and sister separated by 3 years of deception and the terrible mathematics of survival. "There's another way out," Tobias said quietly. "Service tunnel that leads to the eastern canyon wall. Most of the men don't know about it. Most. The ones I trusted, the ones who still believed someone might come for them." His keys clinked as he pulled them from his belt. 30 minutes to get 40 men through a tunnel that barely fits one. Outside, the sound of men moving equipment echoed through the chambers. Preparation for demolition. The systematic destruction of evidence and witnesses alike. Cord looked at her brother. 3 years of grief for a man who'd never died. 3 years of learning to live with loss while he learned to live with compromise. Both of them broken by the same tragedy, just in different ways. Can you live with letting them die? Been living with worse for 3 years. Tobias unlocked the first set of shackles. Question is, can you live with what comes after we save them? Tobias moved through the chambers with practiced efficiency. 3 years of knowing these tunnels. 3 years of learning which men could be trusted and which had given up hope entirely. Samuel, Marcus, gather the others. Quietly. The men responded to his voice with the automatic obedience of long captivity, but Cord saw something else in their eyes. Relief. They'd been waiting for this moment, preparing for it even when it seemed impossible. Pete Morrison struggled to his feet as Tobias unlocked his shackles. How many can make it through the service tunnel? All of us. If we move fast and stay quiet. Tobias handed keys to Samuel Creek. Unlock the men in Chamber 3. Cord, you take Chamber 2. She worked the locks with hands that shook slightly. Not from fear, but from the weight of touching iron that had held these men for years. Each click of a lock opening was a small resurrection. The service tunnel lay hidden behind stacked mining equipment in the deepest chamber. Narrow, low, cut through solid rock by men who'd understood the value of secret exits. The air that flowed from its mouth carried the promise of sky and freedom. Goes for half a mile through the mountain. Opens behind an outcrop on the eastern slope. Tobias checked his pocket watch. The same nervous gesture he'd carried since childhood. 20 minutes before they start the charges. Cord counted heads as the men filed past. 38, some strong enough to help others. Some who needed help to walk at all. 3 years of inadequate food and brutal labor had taken its toll. Go, she told Tobias. Lead them out. What about you? Someone needs to buy you time. Thornfield's going to notice when the tunnels go quiet. Tobias understood, had always understood her better than she understood herself. Federal marshals are coming. Ironjaw got word out before they caught him. When? Soon, maybe not soon enough. He pressed something into her hand. A small leather pouch that clinked with the weight of gold nuggets. 3 years of skimming from the daily take. For the families, for the ones who didn't make it. The last man disappeared into the service tunnel. Old Pete Morrison, helped along by 2 younger men who remembered when he'd taught them to pan for gold in streams that ran clean. Cord sealed the tunnel entrance behind them, moved the mining equipment back into position, made it look undisturbed. If Thornfield discovered the escape route, he'd send men after them. Men with horses and guns and no mercy for escaped prisoners. She climbed toward the surface through tunnels that felt emptier now. The sound of her own footsteps echoed where 43 men had lived and worked and waited for rescue. Oil lamps still burned in empty chambers, throwing shadows on walls that had witnessed too much suffering. The elevator platform waited at the main tunnel entrance. She worked the manual crank, rising toward daylight while charges were being set in the depths below. Enough explosives to bring down miles of tunnels, to bury evidence and create a tragedy that would make headlines for a week before being forgotten. Thornfield waited at the surface with his guards. No surprise on his face when he saw her alone. Men in his business learned to expect betrayals and plan for them. Where are they? Gone. The service tunnel, your brother told you about it. Thornfield nodded to his men. Find them. Kill them all. But the guards didn't move, couldn't move. Federal badges gleamed on their shirts where company pins had been moments before. Ironjaw stood behind them, supported by 2 real federal marshals, his gun trained on Thornfield's back. Marcus Thornfield, you're under arrest for kidnapping, slavery, and conspiracy to commit murder. The mining company executive raised his hand slowly. His expensive coat and soft hands looked out of place in the desert. A man who'd grown wealthy on other people's suffering, finally facing consequences. The charges are already set. You can't stop them now. Thunder rumbled from the canyon depths. Not the thunder of an approaching storm, but the controlled explosions meant to bury secrets forever. Dust rose from the tunnel entrances as tons of rock shifted and settled. But the charges had been set too hastily, placed by men who'd never expected federal marshals to arrive early. The explosions collapsed the main workings, but left the service tunnel intact. Left a way out for men who'd never stopped believing in the possibility of freedom. Figures emerged from the eastern canyon wall. 43 men blinking in sunlight they hadn't seen in years. Tobias led them, still carrying the brass keys that had held them captive, still carrying the weight of choices made under impossible circumstances. The federal marshals had brought wagons, medical supplies, food and clean water for men who'd forgotten what either tasted like. They'd brought something more valuable too: documentation, proof that these men were alive, proof that their families had been lied to, proof that justice was possible even when it came late. Sheriff Morse arrived in shackles, his own deputies having turned federal evidence against him. The territorial government's emergency authority had been revoked by Washington. Real law had come to Devil's Canyon. Cord found Tobias sitting apart from the others, watching the sun set over the desert while federal marshals took statements and mining company officials took trips to territorial prison. "What happens now?" she asked. "Don't know. Haven't thought past today for 3 years." She pulled his watch from her pocket. The silver surface caught the last light of day, still ticking, still keeping time. "This needs to go back to its owner." Tobias took the watch with hands that trembled slightly. "Thought I'd never see it again. Thought you'd buried it with someone you thought was me." "Did bury it. Dug it up again when I realized the dead don't wind their timepieces." 6 months later, Cord stood in the same cemetery where flowers had first told her impossible truths. The headstones were still there, but new graves had been added. Real graves for men who died in the illegal mining operation. Men whose families finally had bodies to bury and truth to grieve. Tobias stood beside her, no longer wearing supervisor's clothes. Free man's clothes now, simple but clean. He'd testified in federal court, received a suspended sentence for his cooperation in the rescue. Some debts were paid with courage instead of time. "Still feel guilty," he said. "Good. Means you're still human." Iron Jaw approached across the cemetery grass. He walked with a cane now, his injuries having healed as well as they were going to. Federal Marshal's badge gleamed on his coat. Real authority backed by real law. "Got another case if you're interested. Colorado territory this time. Mining claims going missing. Families asking questions nobody wants to answer." Cord looked at her brother. They'd spent 6 months learning to be siblings again, learning to trust each other with the truth instead of protecting each other with lies. The process had been difficult but worth the effort. "We work together this time. If you want to, federal marshals can use good people. Territory's got plenty of bad ones." She thought about the watch ticking in Tobias's pocket, about the flowers on empty graves, about the difference between comfortable lies and difficult truths, about the weight of carrying both loss and hope in equal measure. For the first time in 3 years, she wasn't wearing black. And that is all to the story for now. Please let me know where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will create a story there. Consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel. And if you enjoy our content, click this video on your screen. I promise you it's worth watching. See you tomorrow.